Summer 2016 is coming to a close, and when I look at the movies that have come out, this has been a pretty disappointing summer. There have been a lot of big budget adaptations, sequels, franchise films that had $100 million plus budget without including marketing that have bombed, disappointed, or just severely underperformed. And certainly there have been some big hits and even some surprise hits, but there's been a lot of movies that have really disappointed. While this isn't a definitive list, you can just look at it and see you've got sequels to wildly successful films, you've got major franchises, you've got adaptations of beloved books, you've got some great directors in there. As you look at each film on this list, every single one of them has something about it that would make you think this can be a good movie, this can be a profitable movie, but as we see, they all failed. No one sets out to make a bad movie. No one sets out to make a bad trailer. These mistakes are ones that someone probably did voice during production in a board meeting and they got ignored, and therefore something was released that immediately the internet freaked out about. Here are 5 mistakes that Hollywood made this summer when it came to their blockbusters. Mistake number 1, waiting too long to make a sequel. When it comes to Hollywood, there's kind of a shelf life for most all properties. Eventually the momentum dies down and a sequel just feels out of place. It feels out of time. It feels at the wrong point for this to happen. So a couple movies this summer are great examples of this. So Alice in Wonderland came out 6 years ago and made over $1 billion at the worldwide box office. It was a gigantic hit. It hit at a point in time where people wanted to see a weird Tim Burton movie with Johnny Depp acting weird. It came out, made an enormous amount of money around the globe and here in the United States. And then 6 years passed. And those 6 years, Johnny Depp's fame shrank a little bit. We got a little bit burned out on him being weird all the time and wearing makeup. And so the shelf life diminished. And for that matter, while the first movie made a ton of money, it wasn't beloved by people. And so holding on to it for several years, all that momentum kind of went away. The movie was kind of forgotten. And it's like, oh yeah, they made one of those, didn't they? The second one on here that is Independence Day Resurgence. Back when the first movie came out 20 years ago, it was like the biggest movie on the planet. I was in high school. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. That type of CGI mass destruction was huge. This was the start of Will Smith as a movie star. And it's just this big, gigantic surprise because the effects were incredible, both for the time and they still hold up to this day. You've got the discovery of Will Smith as this movie star. And then you jump forward 20 years. And we see the world blown up and destroyed, monuments destroyed, and aliens coming and blowing everything up every single summer now. Then you add to that, you remove the key star of it. There was the charisma, the charm, the fun. You move him out of it, and both the movie suffers because of that, and the story around the movie suffers. And Will Smith wouldn't come back to it. What's Will Smith doing anyway? He doesn't come back to it, so we're just watching a movie that feels 20 years too late, maybe even just 10 years too late. Maybe it had come out 10 years ago, exact same movie, it would have been better received because even 10 years ago, you didn't have so many superhero movies about the end of the world and aliens from another dimension coming to destroy everything. So it was too late. Those movies feel out of time. They feel like they came after the momentum faded. And then that's what you see at the box office, where both of them had such a steep drop-off when it comes to the box office. The second big mistake Hollywood made this summer was bloated budgets. As I mentioned before, every single one of these movies cost $100 million plus without factoring in marketing, which means these are really big, gigantic risks. And you can see the wheels turning in the discussion that we've had, but the end result was gigantic gambles on movies that didn't necessarily need these gigantic budgets. The most personal one of these to me is Star Trek Beyond. So I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I grew up watching the TV shows, the movies, all of it. And the thing is that the TV shows weren't big budget, and the movies, other than the very first one, weren't big budget until J.J. Abrams came along. The core fan base behind Star Trek isn't looking for big spectacle. They're looking for thoughtful science fiction. And they came along and they attempted to make it for a broad audience with the J.J. Abrams reboot. And therefore you get Star Trek Beyond, which has a budget of $185 million. Well, if you look at the history of this franchise, that's making a big, big gamble on the fact that this movie's going to make a lot more money than all of the previous ones before the J.J. Abrams ones came along is going to make that, which is a very questionable bet. It's not a guarantee that this is going to make that kind of money. And for that matter, those other movies were profitable, built an incredible franchise and fan base without having to take that kind of risk, without spending that kind of money. I mean, you can just look it up. Star Trek II, the one that's widely reviewed as the best of them all, cost $11 million to make. They reused footage from the previous film. And of course, you can factor in inflation and a number of other things, and we'll take it up to $50 million. Let's multiply it by 10. It's $110 million, let's say, with inflation, which it's not. That's still so much less than what this movie cost. And they took a huge gamble on something that the fan base, the people that will go see this, that want to go see this, they're excited about it, and they took a gamble they did not need to take. And therefore, this movie is doing poorly at the box office, not because the fans didn't show up, but because they wanted more than the fans to show up. You know, another one to talk about is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows. This movie cost $135 million to make, and domestically, it only made like $80 million. That's not good. But if you step back, it gets even worse than that. So in 1990, they made the original Ninja Turtles movie for $13 million, and it went on to make $135 million in the US. Once again, you can factor in inflation, and that budget will go up and say, we double it. Let's get it up to $30 million. And don't even adjust its gross for inflation. It still made way more while spending way less. You can make a Ninja Turtles movie that appeals to the fan, that excites the fan base, that launches a franchise without spending a ton of money. But instead, they spent a ton of money and they saw diminishing returns. They did not need to spend that amount of money. And let's say they spent $100 million and only made $80 million. Did that extra $30 million help them out? Well, clearly it didn't. Mentioned before, The Legend of Tarzan had an $185 million budget. You just have to ask, what audience were they going for? Because the audience that loves the old books is not the same audience that needs a big blockbuster. The audience that likes this type of adventure story in the woods and a guy going through the jungle with animals, that audience is not looking for big budget CGI spectacle. So you just got to wonder, what if they'd knocked the budget down to $85 million, didn't have the big CGI shots, didn't necessarily have big CGI animals, but you got a good Tarzan movie, give it the same marketing budget. Who's the person that went to go see this movie that wouldn't have gone to go see that movie? Because there's nothing added by spending $100 million extra dollars to put a bunch of CGI into it. It did not help this movie. And instead it became a liability, so it's almost impossible for this movie to make a profit because they decided to spend so much money just to create a movie with an odd decision of making a CGI Tarzan movie. As a counterexample of all of this, you can think about movies like Deadpool, a movie that cost like $65 million. So it wasn't just like this low-budget indie film. Like, they spent money on it, but they spent enough, and they had a small enough scale movie that they could make a fun film that felt cinematic, that was enjoyable to watch, but it wasn't a big, gigantic risk to make, but it had huge payoff in the end. Like, they're making so much money off Deadpool, and part of that is because they didn't spend a ton of money. I mean, you can even compare Deadpool to a movie that also has anti-heroes, Suicide Squad, which even if they made the same amount of money at the box office, Suicide Squad cost nearly 3 times as much. So there's just not the payoff for it. And so Deadpool is a great example of how you can make decisions in your movie making and make movies cheaper. Or an example like The Purge. The Purge movies that even the latest one came out this summer, they made it for such a small budget that even though it only made like $70 million in the US, maybe even less than that, it's still going to reap a gigantic profit because they didn't spend an absurd amount of money on it. They made a movie for their audience for the right budget and didn't waste money. So they're going to make a profit. The third big mistake you definitely see this summer is Hollywood alienating the core fan base. As you look at these movies, they've had a bunch of big franchise movies come out this year, and part of the problem is they're not engaging the franchise fan base. So they tend to be trying to take risks on commodities that have a built-in audience. So Star Trek, so Ghostbusters. There's already an audience for that. The problem is that with these movies, they made choices and have done things that are going to alienate the audience that they tried to milk to make this movie. The reason they're taking a gamble on it is because of this audience, and then they market the movie and create the movie in a way that's going to make those people not want to connect with it. So a lot of the backstory surrounding Star Trek Beyond is that there was a switch in the directors and the writers because the original version was too much like Star Trek. Well, if you're a Star Trek fan and you find out that they fired their director for being too much like Star Trek, does that make me as a fan feel more connected or less connected? Of course, less connected. Then they bring in the replacement director and they get the guy that directed a bunch of Fast and Furious movies. Now, I love Fast and the Furious movies, but for totally different reasons than the reasons I love Star Trek. So when I'm hearing Star Trek Beyond is going to be less and less and less Star Trek-y, and then they bring in Fast and Furious guy, I'm going, okay, well, this isn't Star Trek, it's Fast and Furious in space. Then they put out the trailer. The trailer's filled with popular pop music. It just feels like a roller coaster ride in space. It feels like Fast and Furious in space. It alienated me as a fan. I'm going, all right, I'm going to go see it. I'm sure I'll enjoy it, but this isn't Star Trek. And I'm not a purist. I'm not a purist like some people who hated what they were seeing and they didn't like the JJ movies for not being enough like Star Trek. And so they felt alienated. And the silly part is people that saw the movie said this one is the most like Star Trek of all of them. But the buzz surrounding it before the movie came out was, it doesn't feel like Star Trek at all. Why'd they get this guy? They alienated their core audience. Or certainly the most extreme example of this year would be Ghostbusters. So for over 20 years, they had been working on making a Ghostbusters 3 with the original Ghostbusters, and Bill Murray was holding off, and Dan Aykroyd had a script, and he kept working on the script, and they kept talking about it, and it seemed like it was kind of slowing down a little bit, and then Harold Ramis died. And within months, they announced, we're going to do a new Ghostbusters reboot, and it's going to be all women. And immediately, as a fan of the original, it put a poor taste in my mouth without hardly knowing anything about it. I was just going, wait, after 20 years, you just threw that out and you just rushed to make a new one? And here we are 2 years later, and the movie's already been made. And says, we're not even to the trailer yet. I'm already feeling alienated just because it didn't feel like they were being respectful. It felt like they were looking to be able to make a Ghostbusters movie, and as soon as they could snatch an opportunity to do it, they did. And that involved an original cast member dying, and that just doesn't sit well with me. And that might have nothing to do with what actually happened, but that's what a perception of mine as a person that loves Ghostbusters, loves the work of Harold Ramis, and now knows this movie exists. And then you move beyond that. So they cast all women to replace the original characters, which, of course, they were going to alienate some people a little bit by changing the gender, and some of that fair, maybe some of it unfair. The problem is they didn't really try and sell it in a way that would make you convinced that they were doing anything other than token gender swapping. And you have the director going on his Twitter account literally saying F you to the fans and calling them misogynists for disagreeing with a swap of gender. Well, you're not trying to sell me on why you did this because it was best for the story or best for the movie. You're just making a change because you wanted to. Of course you're going to alienate your fan base when you kind of give them the middle finger and say, F you if you don't like what I did. Then the trailer comes out and it's not funny. Once again, if you make a bad product while saying F you to people and calling them misogynist and sexist, and then you make a bad product, you alienate the fan base. The fourth big mistake Hollywood made was releasing bad trailers for some of these movies. Now, of course, no one sets out to make a bad trailer. The problem is with these trailers, you could identify the big problem before the trailer's released. So if you go through these, think about Ben-Hur. It seems like a generic enough period piece epic movie. The problem is, as you watch it, it cuts to Morgan Freeman with dreadlocks. In any theater you were in that was full of people, if they saw that image, people would start laughing out loud as a group to this epic, serious trailer. Totally wrong response. What's the most memorable thing about this trailer? Morgan Freeman with ridiculous dreadlocks. That's what people remembered, and so the story surrounding it was, oh yeah, that cheap looking, that cheesy looking Ben-Hur remake. Why would you remake Ben-Hur and do it cheesy? That's weird. The second one where the trailer sabotaged it was Star Trek Beyond. So the first trailer they put out featured heavily the song Sabotage by the Beastie Boys. Now, in and of itself, that's a perfectly fine song. The song is actually in Star Trek 2009, so it even fits within the continuity of these movies. It isn't so crazy. The problem is, the bad buzz surrounding this movie was that it's not enough like Star Trek. It's too much like Fast and the Furious. It's too much of an action movie in space. And so you counter that by demonstrating how much it is like Star Trek, yet still fun and still a blockbuster. Instead, they put out a rock and roll trailer with the Beastie Boys, which affirms all the bad stereotypes. They sent the wrong message, which actually does not represent the movie. As I said before, people that saw the movie said this is the most like Star Trek of these new movies, and this trailer makes it look the least. So they misrepresented their movie in all the wrong ways. Finally, the most obvious pick would be Ghostbusters. This is the most disliked movie trailer in YouTube's history. Right off the bat, that's a really bad sign. And that's for the most part undeserved. It's not that horrible of a trailer. It's just a bad trailer of a remake of a beloved property. And as a trailer for a comedy, it's not funny. The jokes fall flat, which is not good at all. And the worst part about that is the movie's kind of funny. I kind of liked the movie. I liked it. And it's much better than this trailer, which is a phrase you never want to be true of your movie trailer combination is, oh yeah, the movie's a lot better than the trailer. It's not like that at all. You never want that. And in this case, it's really like that. Even though the movie's not all that great, it's just a lot better than this trailer. But even worse than that, it misrepresents, at least the first trailer misrepresented what this movie was. Like at the beginning of the trailer, it starts off by saying 30 years ago. 4 scientists saved the city. Which is not true in this continuity. It is not a continuation. It is a reboot. It is a remake. It is not a continuation, so the 4 scientists didn't do that. So that trailer point misrepresents the movie, which just reminds us in the trailer that that's the movie we wished that this was, and likewise frustrate us because it's not what this movie is. They're lying to the audience by saying that. And then they deliver a trailer that's not funny, and a movie that's not likable enough. And so they really botched this trailer and the marketing entirely for it by representing it as a worse movie than it actually is and lying about it being better in a different way than it actually is, which of course will make your fans not want to go see it. The final big mistake that Hollywood made with these movies was giving a lackluster treatment to beloved classics. So the problem with remaking any classic film is immediately you're going to get a backlash from the fans saying, why are you remaking this movie? It's already a classic. It's already perfect. And whenever you remake it, immediately you give yourself a responsibility of trying to prove to those people why this movie deserved to be made in the first place. Because they're already going to be skeptical, and that drives the narrative surrounding the movie. Why are you making this? What are you adding to it? How are you going to make this better? And I'll start off with the counterexample, The Jungle Book. They announced it, and immediately people could be like, why would you go after that again? It's been remade before. It's been live action before. Why are we doing this? Then they announced they're going to get Jon Favreau to do it. So Jon Favreau's had hits and misses, but when he hits the ball, he hits it out of the park. Like, this guy's A game is an A game. And they brought him in to do it. So immediately people weren't so scared. And then a year before the movie came out, they presented it at Comic-Con, and he says to the crowd, hey, this is the most technologically advanced movie ever made. So in which most people immediately went, sure it is. And then he showed footage and people went, wait, what? You just filmed all of that in Los Angeles? How did you do that? So the immediate buzz was, this movie is going to look incredible. The trailer comes out and it looks incredible and lives up to that hype. The movie comes up and then it lives up to the quality of the buzz surrounding it. But so they took a beloved property, brought in a great director, and then used technologically advanced technology to make it awesome. You felt like they were respecting what they were doing, which was remaking a piece of our childhood. Now the negative examples of this. So they announced they're remaking Ben-Hur, an epic classic. Who is going to direct this epic classic? The director of Abraham Lincoln. Vampire Hunter? What? Like, you hear that and you go, what? Is this a joke? Am I being pranked right now? Why would you get this guy to take on this property? And right from the get, you just hear that and you go, this is not a good idea. You're setting yourself for bad buzz, bad publicity, skepticism right from the get-go. So people are going to be angry about it without having seen a single frame about it, without having heard casting about it. They're going to be angry with you just because of who you picked to direct this movie that's based off of a classic film that no one thinks you should be remaking anyway. Like if they'd announced 10 years ago, Ridley Scott is going to redirect Ben-Hur with a $200 million budget, you'd hear that and you go, oh wow, that could actually be really good. Man, after Gladiator, this is a perfect fit. This could be awesome. No. They picked the guy that did Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. The next one is Ghostbusters once again, a movie that they had 20 years of development hell for Ghostbusters 3. And then as soon as Harold Ramis dies, within months, they've got a new plan, and within 2 years, you've got a movie. 20 years of developing a movie that didn't happen, 2 years, and we've already got a movie that did happen, and the end result was lackluster at best. No one is raving about this movie. A lot of people like me are like, it was good enough. It was okay. It wasn't awful. It wasn't as bad as the trailers. But they took a beloved property like this great classic movie of my childhood, huge hit. People just love the original. And then they made it was good enough at best. This is the best is good enough is what this movie is out of it. Well, of course you're going to alienate fans. Of course you're going to make people mad when you're treating this stuff that way. In closing, it's a bit unfair for me to make a video like this because it's much easier to look back with 20/20 hindsight and analyze what other people did wrong. They're trying to predict the future and they're trying to figure out what type of movie will resonate well, and making a movie is a team sport trying to hit a moving target, which is really, really hard to do. The problem is you keep seeing Hollywood repeat these same mistakes where they're putting too much confidence in existing properties and taking too big of risks by putting too much into the budget. All of this should concern you as fans because it makes it so we don't get the movies we do want, and sometimes we won't get sequels to movies we want. I liked Star Trek Beyond. I want more of these Star Trek movies, and that's less likely because they spent so much money on this movie that it can't make its money back. I want more Ghostbusters movies. Maybe not this franchise, but I want more Ghostbusters movies, and that is so much less likely to happen now that they totally tanked this movie. For Hollywood's sake, to make money, to make better movies, to take the right risks, they need to stop taking these gigantic risks. And that'd be better for me, and that'd be better for you, and that would be better for them. So what do you think is the biggest mistake Hollywood has made this summer when it comes to blockbusters? Why have so many of these movies just flopped hard at the box office? If you're new to this channel and like what I have to say, I make a lot of videos like this, and so if you want to catch each one of them as I put them out, please click that subscribe button and join the conversation. Thank you for watching. Oh, I'm filming right now, buddy.
Dad, let me tell you something.
Okay, you want to tell me something? What is it?
Me and Claire are going to get some milk. So we're first...
All right, you can go get some milk, buddy.
And we're also going to get some popcorn.
You can have some popcorn.
Bye, Dad.
Bye-bye.